Good evening. The program you're about to hear on Riverwest Radio uh, does not represent the views of Riverwest Radio. The opinions and statements made during the next hour or so are those of the Pictures Get Smaller and the people making them. Good evening and welcome to The Pictures Get Smaller. I'm Adam O'Connick and I'm joined by Justin Schumacher and Brian Keelan. Back in October, Brian and Justin, along with Bridget Keys, spent an episode chatting about video games, and they're back tonight to continue that conversation by examining several other aspects of video games and gaming culture. Like Bridget before me, I confess to not being much of a gamer. I'll play the odd game of Halo or Left 4 Dead or even Tekken every now and again, but the last console that I owned was Sega Genesis. So I'm excited to hear Justin and Brian's expert opinions as the rest of you listeners. The previous video game episode revolved around game narratives, video game auteurs, links between games and culture, and distinctions between gaming platforms, such as consoles, computers, and even phones. So, Brian, Justin, before we get to some of the topics for tonight's episode, did you have any follow-up thoughts from last time, or any points that you care to bring up before we move on tonight? Anything about narrative or...
I do not. My opinion has not changed.
Yeah, I think we covered most of that stuff, and honestly, it's been a long semester,
That's
and
true.
October was, seems ages ago at this point, so...
Yeah, it certainly does. Well, I guess what I was curious about after listening to the last episode and greatly enjoying it were a few moments when you said you could have chatted more about certain topics, so I thought maybe we could begin there. It seemed like the issue of economics and branding was always on the edges of your conversation before. In particular, Rockstar Games was brought up several times as being something that both of you had a particular interest in. So I guess I'm curious to begin. What do you see the importance of branding is in terms of both creators of games? You talked about video game auteurs last time, so individual designers, as well as just these companies that have a name brand, sort of brand recognition. How does that, affect you as gaming enthusiasts, as gaming academics? That's it.
Well, I think we can start with how it sets up false expectations for games. I mean, I think the clear, most recent example is what BioWare had to endure with the launch of the Dragon Age franchise and struggling to reconcile the expectations set up in their fan base through Mass Effect and Knights of the Old Republic and what they had to deal with Dragon Age and the problems there. I mean, they've been branded as these Western RPG gurus, and they released a game in Dragon Age 2 that was not seen as was not up to the lofty standards of the BioWare name.
What when you hear the BioWare name, like what are those lofty standards? What does it mean for? What would you expect?
Meaningful choices, scope.
Yeah, I mean, even going back to one of the... I'm not even sure if it might have been the very first BioWare game, but like Baldur's Gate in it was the late 90s, early 2000s. It was this, the first, big kind of RPG that set the tone for what pretty much all BioWare RPGs were. And it was kind of a landmark, I guess, in these kind of RPG genre, and pretty much people expected that from BioWare forever after that game came out. So for the past, over a decade now, the kind of things that Justin was getting into with the narrative, and we need really good choices to make and
complex characters.
Exactly, yeah, things like that.
And it wasn't just that they misdelivered on. It was also Star Wars: The Old Republic, where they tried to take their open world thing, their design philosophy, and make it a massively multiplayer experience. Unfortunately for BioWare, they've yet to figure out how to make a game where people can play together. The games that they make are solely for one player to experience. It's difficult to read a novel with another person, and that's what they tried to do with the Old Republic.
Especially with the formula that BioWare has developed over the years, how it's played is really a solo kind of campaign game where you are in control of, you play one character, but you're in control of like a squad or, a group of people, and I don't even know how they would do that in an online setting. It's really difficult in my mind.
It doesn't work. The answer is it does not work.
Yeah.
That issue of individual gaming versus communal gaming is something that came up last time. So when you're playing the BioWare games that do work, again, it's because of that sort of individualistic immersion,
Yeah.
and that's simply not replicable for a communal gaming experience.
No, it's certainly replicable, but when you have to pay in a monthly subscription system like you do with an MMORPG, and to get all of the perks associated with that, there's sort of an expectation that you need to be able to do stuff with other people to justify paying for a service.
Mm-hmm.
And BioWare has yet to figure out how to realistically deliver on that promise, and still live up to the standards of storytelling that they've been setting for the last decade and a half.
And I think storytelling there is one of the probably the most critical word, because what BioWare has done is with their RPGs is they have really made it about telling your story, the story of your character that you
Yeah.
create, and it's really an individual experience. I mean, in a lot of like online games, of course, you kind of create your own avatar, and you do that in a lot of BioWare's single-player RPGs. But then, as you play the game, it becomes really all about your choices and telling your story, and
Sure.
trying to translate that into an online game doesn't, like Justin said, it just doesn't work.
And you've sort of seen similar branding issues with a studio like Rockstar. Over this last year, they released Max Payne 3, which doesn't come with the typical Rockstar shtick that we're all accustomed to with the open world space of a Grand Theft Auto or
Yeah.
a Red Dead Redemption. They try to do...
Those are the three big Rockstar games: Max Payne, Red Dead Redemption, and Grand Theft Auto. Would you say? Or
I mean, I think Rockstar is mainly just known for Grand Theft Auto, and
Red Dead Redemption is number 2 on
Yeah.
the list of franchises.
yeah,
and actually when you brought up the
even above Max Payne.
because
Yeah.
Max Payne even an original Rockstar? It seemed like it was another studio that developed like the first game or the first two games. I don't know. This might be.
I definitely
in
know they did the
details.
third one.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the third one has, rave reviews for a single-player focused game. That's not the Rockstar stick. It's
No.
about space and choice. And when you have a confined narrative that is relatively short, you've got a fan base that has expectations for space and being able to consume a space, not just consume a story.
Yeah, and actually, when you brought up the idea of branding, it seems with video games, and we can link this to auteurs like we were
Sure.
talking about last time. With video games, like studios and auteurs or whatever, it seems like they get pigeonholed into a certain genre or a certain type of game a lot easier than something like film or even like literature or something like that.
Yeah.
People expect, as Justin was saying, people expect this Grand Theft Auto style like open world when they play a Rockstar game. And even though like Max Payne was reviewed quite well, it wasn't maybe
Did not
received.
sell well, has only moved 2.1 million copies, which is far below the Rockstar standard for what they expect out of their properties. And 2K, the sort of publisher for Rockstar, well, Take-Two Interactive, they also have the 2K studio line, and they've sort of begun to unbrand the 2K studio line because they had 2K Boston, which is by one of my favorite video game auteurs, Ken Levine, but they've returned to their original name, Irrational Games, to return to the cachet that they established when they made their System Shock series in the 90s. They've gone away from the 2K line because it's sort of been muddled by a number of other studios who touched some of their intellectual properties and didn't do such a great job with them.
Yeah.
So Take-Two Interactive decided to unbrand Irrational Games as part of the 2K Studio franchise so that they could reclaim the independence and intellectual and artistic value associated with Ken Levine in the original Irrational Games.
This sounds like an issue of over expansion due to popularity, perhaps, or I mean, does the expansion through success somehow create a watered down product eventually? Is that what we're seeing with some of these games from well-known companies that no longer are providing the quality that the gamers once got from them, like with the new Max Payne?
I don't know if it necessarily creates a watered down product, but I think it kind of stifles creativity, because
Yeah.
if you look at like the original like Grand Theft Auto and things like that, it's a pretty new concept for gaming in like the late 90s when it came out, and then Grand Theft Auto 3, it went from the top down perspective into 3D, and this was it was like kind of a big deal. And now I mean, that was almost 10 years ago when Grand Theft Auto 3 came out, and There's been a bunch of other Grand Theft Auto games, but they've all been like within the same formula. And if you see Rockstar kind of move away from that and maybe try and innovate a little bit, then it'd probably not be quite as received quite as well. I mean, they did a little bit with Red Dead Redemption, by putting it into changing the setting, but it's still like the same game essentially. You're not in like a giant city, you're in the Old West, which is awesome. But
Yeah, I don't think that good game developers are going to develop good games with good intellectual property or create new intellectual property. I think the problem becomes when fan expectations don't match realistic expectations, and I think that sort of becomes associated both to intellectual property branding and studio branding.
Well, with these expectations, is it a matter of you can't expect a winner every time out, or is it that there should be, I don't know, some sense that divergence from an established pattern is acceptable? I mean, when you're talking about this, I couldn't help but think of, filmmakers or even musicians who throw their fans a curveball every now and again with a decidedly minor film or minor album, something that's at least considered that way by some of the fans. Like in a previous episode, we talked about Paul Thomas Anderson. Punch Drunk Love is probably not most people's favorite Paul Thomas Anderson film, but it still is an interesting one. And so I'm curious if some of these games, like maybe in works that initially seem minor from musicians or from filmmakers, can be reassessed down the road, or does that just not happen in gaming culture? Like, are there gaming contrarians who will say the latest Max Payne is the best Max Payne, and then or they return to it years later somehow and reassess it?
Possibly. My concern is how technology with games is different from movies for a lot of ways, because consoles will die out and they'll be harder and harder to find, and it's they're not as prolific. You can't just play them digitally yet. That's slowly changing, and we're getting that avenue for consumption of retro games. But I think that one of the big differences between the two mediums is that game developers are far less prolific with the amount of text that they'll create throughout their career than what you'll see from a filmmaker.
Because, right, a game can sell for a much longer period, right? I mean, that's part of it.
It can sell for much longer. It takes a lot longer to make.
Yeah.
I mean, Ken Levine has only made 2 games this decade. I mean, in the last 10 years.
You've brought up Ken Levine, and just for point of clarification,
yeah,
who is he and what has he developed?
Ken Levine is the head of Irrational Games, formerly 2K Boston. They're part of the Take-Two Interactive sort of network of studios. Rockstar's involved with them as well. He is company developed System Shock and System Shock 2, but most contemporary gamers will know him as the guy who created BioShock, a sort of steampunk, dystopic, single-player action-adventure first-person shooter game. And his next game comes out in 2013 with BioShock Infinite. So, I mean, that game has lofty expectations because it is one of the only games coming out next year where people have artistic expectations rather than entertainment expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really think of anything to add on there. Sorry about the dead air there, Adam. But,
No.
I think Justin summed it up pretty well. I mean, yeah, and it's kind of interesting though. There is the artistic expectations for BioShock Infinite, and that doesn't really happen that often with games. People expect a lot out of this game, like somehow it's going to make some sort of statement or, something that the original BioShock did. I haven't played all the way through BioShock 2, but, it's gonna mess with us in some way instead of like, hey, we're just gonna play this because it's a fun game, like Call of Duty comes out every year and it has great multiplayer. We like it because it's fun. It's not really making any sort of statement or trying to say something about games. I don't know.
And
so, I mean, at the bare minimum for a game to be acceptable, it has to be entertaining, engaging, but from that base level of quality, you have this spectrum from just entertainment up to artistic merit. And so maybe you guys can talk about that a little bit more. Games that you feel have some artistic merit. I know outside of the gaming world, this is a debate that some people have. I'm not one of those people. I accept video games obviously as another art medium, but some people would claim that video games can't be art for whatever reason.
Thanks, Roger Ebert.
Exactly. Yes, he's the main figure in this sort of debate, or at least the most public figure. So you guys are big time gamers. What makes a game artistic? What makes a Ken Levine game distinct from the newest Max Payne?
I don't think that I would think of any game as not art.
Well, sure,
I mean, I think I think
but you can have a
yeah.
a spectrum again within
Yeah.
that range of.
I mean, I think that the Max Payne game is art, and it's very artistic, and it's very critical about this older sort of protagonist. What makes Ken Levine's game so different is that he burdens the player with philosophical both critique and choices that they have to reconcile through play. I mean, aesthetically, BioShock isn't the most artistic game. It's kind of dark. It's got nice moments. It's got nice set pieces, but it's not something like Flower or Journey where it becomes a very clearly aesthetic experience. I think for Ken Levine's games and for Irrational games, the art comes through the philosophical experience they put the player through.
Yeah, and I think actually, and what's nice about the games as art thing is in the past few years there are becoming a wider range of what we consider
Yeah.
games as art. What I have kind of been thinking about it recently, and the way I look at it is the games that we've seen as being like above the rest. I'm definitely with Justin. I think that like pretty much all video games are art
Sure.
in some way, and you can view them as such. I think the games that people point out are the games that kind of comment on gaming at a meta level. Things like Shadow of the Colossus, where in the normal video game formula, there's tons of enemies and things like that, and you really don't think about killing these enemies. And then Shadow of the Colossus, you are put in this world where there's really only 16 enemies, and you're meant to kind of feel guilty about killing these giant peaceful beasts and things like that. And so it really comes back around like this game is kind of commenting on the nature of video games themselves and how
Yeah.
we play them. Justin did mention things like Flower and Journey, and I think those are good examples of it's not really making a comment so much on the nature of playing games, but it is more of an aesthetic experience that we can view as an artistic experience.
I see. When you're hunting these 16 beasts, reluctantly hunting them, like what is it that makes you feel pause as a gamer? Like how is that philosophical, quandary delivered in the gaming world?
It's really subtle, actually. You actually, instead of, in most games, it kind of sets up like where the enemies are trying to attack you, so
Yeah.
you can maybe kind of say like, oh, it's like self-defense or whatever. In here, you actually like in Shadow of the Colossus, you like seek out the colossi, and you like so you're the aggressor. They don't really attack you until you attack them, so you kind of think about that as the game goes on. You absorb the like kind of essence or whatever of the colossi, and your character kind of continues to deteriorate. Your face gets a little darker. Your eyes actually slowly get like black. So you're essentially the villain of the game, but
The
you don't.
killing waits on you.
Exactly,
Weighs heavily
yeah.
on you.
And-
You become a Sith Lord.
Yeah.
You do. You're pretty much like Darth Vader at the end of the game.
That's
Yeah.
really fascinating.
Yeah, I'm gonna quote Ron Swanson. That's gonna happen. It's art. Anything is anything. It even something as banal artistically as a Madden is still doing a sort of comment on football and the sort of
Sure.
the ballet of football and what it means to sort of structure that. And same thing with
And
something
isn't there
like
something like franchise mode where you
Yeah.
can? I mean, it's essentially narrativizing.
you're
would
writing
just
your
be-
own story
yeah.
of a franchise.
Yeah.
And even a Halo, which has sort of become the poster child for and Call of Duty to some extent, the sports gamification of the first person shooter, wherein which it just becomes a roster update of new guns every year. Even those
But
games,
the promo ad was produced by David Fincher, right?
actually the one for the new Call of Duty Black Ops 2 was directed by Guy Ritchie.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah. Guy Ritchie and Robert Downey Jr. teaming up again.
That one was produced,
That-
not directed, but produced by
David
David
Fincher, I think, produced the Halo 4 ad.
Yeah,
Oh, that's right. Yep.
See, even movie auteurs can't stay away from games.
It's true. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
becoming a bigger thing for movie directors and producers to get in there. And now we're just waiting for that Halo movie to finally come out. If
No
it
one,
ever will.
no one's waiting for that. I'm not.
I don't think anybody
But
is either.
maybe that's something worth talking about too, because we had Steven Spielberg and his sort of interactions with EA and how that failed miserably.
And what was Spielberg's involvement?
He tried to get a
Is it
couple.
part of DreamWorks that expanded?
Kind
into
of.
gaming?
He tried to make a couple games through EA Studio in Los Angeles, and all he really got out was Boom Blocks, right?
Which I love, actually. Boom Blocks is a great game. Not many people played it, but
Exactly. It was a really well done game that no one played. And then Guillermo del Toro has been trying to make a horror game for like 5 years now.
yeah.
And that's getting no traction. THQ, a studio who has the exact opposite problems of branding, has a 2K, a 2K studio or a Take-Two studio. Just basically let it go. Like, if anybody wants this IP, it's free. Take our work. We don't want anything to do with working with on this Guillermo del Toro game. Because I think part of what would happen with a Guillermo del Toro game is there would be expectations for a game directed by Guillermo del Toro as movie auteur, not game designer.
I know I definitely would, because I was like, I don't know like how I felt about it, but when I first heard of like, oh, Guillermo del Toro's like, directing or involved with like a horror video, I'm like, oh man, that would be awesome. And now it's probably not going to happen, but I definitely would have higher expectations than just some like random company being like, yeah, we're coming out with a horror game.
I apologize for such a generic question, but maybe I need even further clarification then about the role of the game designer. The game designer is not the person who's literally doing the programming, that sort of thing, but the game designer creates the narrative, what sort of things does one do?
That's typically going to be your executive producer in different role. Well, maybe the same role. I really don't know what an executive producer does in a movie studio. I assume they all just do what Michael Bay does, and that would be a Sudoku puzzle. But I think a producer on a video game does everything in some capacity. They write, they contribute to art, they program, they do level design, they do gameplay design. Their hands are in all of the different teams, and they're making sure that the teams are working together. So it's not just a supervisory role, but it's also an involved sort of function of making sure that they could do everything if something were to happen.
I see.
Yeah, and it seems with video game design, there are, I'm not taking away anything from movies, but there are like these really specialized roles, like we have like the programmers who do the coding, and then you have like the artists who come up with the art style for the game, and those things are like really, really hard to, in my mind at least. I've never done it, but it seems in my mind that those would be really, really hard things to coordinate and make a good game. So I actually wish I knew more about like the game like development process. That's like something that's always kind of like fascinated me. I'm like thought like, how do they actually like make this thing?
Right.
Very slowly.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it seems meticulous process to undergo. Maybe we can then think about, going back to Rockstar Games, which has become like known for these immersive worlds and maybe brought them to a more popular level than they previously had been. I'm curious about the origins of Rockstar Games, if you can speak to that, because there's always been games produced by consoles, games produced by third parties for consoles, and now that seems to be the norm, is that the third-party gaming third-party game producers create more games than the consoles themselves. I don't know if that's just my outsider perspective or if that's accurate or not. And Rockstar Games in particular seems to, again, it's become this brand, as we started off with, that's as well known as any of the consoles to some degree. So did Rockstar Games' emergence coincide with, say, PlayStation or something, which signaled a new period in gaming,
It was PS2, right?
Actually, it was the Grand Theft Auto 3
was
PS2. Yeah.
And that's where okay, so Rockstar it's Sam and Dan Houser, right?
Yeah.
They're a couple British expatriates. They live in New York. That's where Rockstar's based. They always talk about they wanted to make games that were about American popular culture. So I mean, I think that's a very common thread throughout all of the Rockstar games.
That's interesting, a foreign British fascination with American culture.
And it was about movies, it was about music, and it was about the people. That was a very clear design, like the philosophical choice that they made when they were making their games. And I think that Grand Theft Auto 3 up through San Andreas were all very closely tied to the development of Sony's PlayStation 2. and there was no exclusivity deal. Eventually, those games came out on the Xbox as a sort of package, but the original launches were with solely PS2, and then Grand Theft Auto 4 changed. It became, we are going to launch on both, and what you saw was Grand Theft Auto 4 become more successful on the Xbox than on the PlayStation 3, because the Xbox got a head start in that market with that console generation, so they had filled the market faster. And we sort of saw Rockstar throw their weight behind Microsoft in a way to make sure that their game still sold.
And
So they were propping up Xbox, whose technology was lagging behind PlayStation 3, or
It had launched a year earlier, so more
Yeah.
people had one.
oh, okay.
There was a greater level of, I don't know what the economic term is, but I'm going to say proliferation.
yeah, and the PS3 actually, it took a long time to catch up because it was super expensive when it first came out. Like, I can't remember how much the Xbox 360 was when it launched. It was like $400 or $500, but the PS3 was like $600 when
Right.
which was insanely expensive for a video game console, and people didn't like it. And so the PlayStation 3 took a long time. I mean, it's caught up now, but it took years and years for the PS3 to really kind of catch on. So there was a much larger market for Grand Theft Auto 4 on the Xbox when it was first launched. So.
In addition to the sticker shock with PS3, did it not seem like there was enough value for that increased price, and not enough distinction from PS2?
No, I don't think that was. It was about the price. It was
Solely the okay.
because at that time the joke was that, okay, you could buy a PS3 or you could buy an Xbox 360 and a Wii.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it was. You could have got those two consoles for the same price as the PlayStation 3.
Okay.
The PS3 is a technically more sophisticated machine. It produces a better quality of image. It was just when it first launched, it was a far ludicrous price point, and it was something that at that time people were not interested in shelling that out because they already had their Xbox, and they were like, there was no, until Uncharted came out, there was no, you need to get a PS3 for this game. And that's where you see first party developers come in, where they make games for a console to give people a reason to buy the console.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this last time, so I don't want to harp on it too much.
No,
but
go right
speaking of
ahead.
like a
It's always-
first person versus or not first person versus third person, but first party versus
Yeah.
third party game development. Excuse me for that little error there. I think that's one of the major things one of the major things that made the Wii kind of limp to the finish line. We just had the Wii U launch.
Yeah.
The Wii had really, really great first-party games. It had really great Mario games and Zelda games and all of these games developed by Nintendo. But all the third-party developers, like, they didn't really know how to do anything for it. It had these
yeah.
great motion controls, but like none of the third-party developers, I don't know if it was too hard or if they were too lazy or what.
Yeah.
But they just like couldn't come up with like novel ideas. So there was like maybe a couple really good third-party games for the Wii, and then everything else was made by Nintendo. So it seemed like by the end there weren't enough good like games for
Right.
the Wii, and people were just like, I mean, I know that's kind of I own a Wii, and that's kind of how I've felt over the past couple years. Like, I really don't have a reason to play it because
Sure.
there's just not the games there. Whereas like
Unless you have a party with non-gamers. who-
yeah, exactly. Like, hey, let's play this game, or something like that. We could play like WarioWare or something, which is
Or
an awesome
bowling,
one.
or
Yeah,
right? It's the console for non-gamers.
yeah.
Is
Wii
that
Sports
what
is
it's
great.
become?
Yeah,
It was the console for your grandmother.
yeah,
That's what it was sold as.
and it worked for him for
Yeah.
a long time. So can't
And
really
then it
complain.
was like, we need games. No one wants to make games for a console, and we just lost 80% of the market.
something like that.
Sure.
It was ridiculous. Yeah.
That's what third-party companies are making, like 80% of the games, basically.
Yeah. And if you're gonna have a successful console, you need good third-party games.
And you need third-party support. And Microsoft and Sony are slightly, they figured out how to do it in a way in which,
It's so corporate-y. We need this
know.
I know.
synergy between companies.
Yes.
and yeah, it's just gonna be that way for, I think, for a very long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually one thing with gaming that there's a lot of things that like have changed in the past 10 years, and that people are saying is going to change, but yeah, I don't see that system changing anytime soon. You really need those
No.
third-party games.
And you don't, and those console developers don't want to release new consoles because they don't want to deal with the amount of work it takes to get developers up to speed on these new technological
Oh, yeah.
machines. And so there's a lot of work for them. Also, the fact that most consoles don't make money.
Yeah.
I don't remember the price, but it was like Sony was losing like $250 or something for each PS3 sold at launch.
Yeah, and
Even
now
at the astronomical cost.
Yeah.
Wow.
and I mean, and now it's like less than half the original price. So I mean,
Yeah.
they're losing like a ton of money, like
Well,
every console.
They cut some stuff out, so I think that
yeah,
was
that's
part
true
of
too.
it.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's another reason why this console generation
It's been the longest.
Yeah, it's dragged on for. I mean, usually we would have like new systems like a year or two ago.
5 years, I think, is 5 to
Yeah.
6. And hey, the longer
Yeah.
this console generation stays, the better. You see developers who want it, but you also see gamers who don't. Their gamers have like, there are too many games to play anyway. And it's not like the games that are coming out are bad. This has been like a relatively daring year for new intellectual property.
Yeah, I don't mind at all. I think there's always new games I want to play. I mean, I'm still like way far behind. I need to catch up on stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's just this
And
weird.
you don't feel like the consoles have any limitations any obvious limitations, right, for the gaming
I
games that are being produced?
yeah, the only thing that I think here's what's going to happen. Microsoft's going to put a Blu-ray player in their next Xbox.
Yeah.
They're going to up
Sure.
the processing power and the memory so games can look a little bit nicer. But we're getting to the point where everyone wants hyper-realism, but who cares?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the whole like better graphics thing for like the first like 4 or 5 console
I don't want to
generations.
play Lord of the Rings graphics. I want to play
Yeah.
video games. I like being aware that I'm playing a video game.
Yeah, and
You like seeing some of the Steam show? Is that
Yeah, I
part
mean,
of the
I like to
experience?
see the glitches. I like to see the clipping. I like to see the jerkiness of motion when the models don't react.
Yeah, and I mean, I think and stuff looks really good right now.
It
so,
doesn't
I mean, yeah.
look bad at all.
Yeah.
And it's new technology is not going to make better games. That's such a huge mistake that I keep seeing people want.
yeah.
Games are great now. It's because people understand the technology, so they don't have to focus on trying to figure out how to make the technology work. They're trying to figure out how to make the technology work for them rather than work for the technology.
Which is, one good thing about this console generation is that, I think people are, in the past couple years, people have realized how they can do really creative things, and we can go back to the kind of, fetishization or whatever of retro gaming, because with, I think, I mean, you maybe saw it in the last generation a little bit, but with this one, you're really seeing, like, games that are in the style of, like,
Yeah.
8-bit games or, like, arcade games, but what's interesting about it is they're doing things that they weren't able to do with the the games back in the 80s,
Sure.
but it still has that style, and I really like those games, so it's kind of like, I don't know, like a neo retro thing, like, I don't know, like somebody should probably like write about this, but yeah, I mean, like one of my favorite games recently is actually I've been playing a lot of like Pac-Man Championship Edition DX, which is it's
that's interesting.
Pac-Man,
Yeah.
but it's like new things that you wouldn't have been able to do in the original Pac-Man game in like 1981 or whenever that was released. You can have like 100 ghosts on the screen at the same time and do all these kind of cool things with it.
Is
That
the maze three-dimensional?
the maze isn't 3-dimensional, which I'm actually grateful for because it has that same kind of Pac-Man.
But there is a
aesthetic, yeah.
Pac-Man where there is a three-dimensional map. I'm not that. It
That
was
is a
like
thing.
Pac-Man World, right?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it-
it was awful.
Yeah, it wasn't good.
Sounds like it'd be like Wolfenstein or something.
Yeah. So
It was basically trying to turn Pac-Man into Mario.
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
and it was just weird. Pac-Man had arms and legs and like ran around and tried to eat fruit, and it just seemed out of place. So, and that was it was either PS1 or PS2, but now, like I'm saying, we have these games that have like the aesthetic of the old
Yeah.
arcade games, but they're doing different things, and I like that, and it's interesting that we're kind of going back and like, hey, see what we can do now with this kind of old, I mean, like the oldest of genres and things like that. So.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up, Ryan, because this was a big topic that I wanted us to think about was retro gaming, nostalgia in gaming, and it seems like, the video game industry is what began the 70s, more or less, essentially.
Yeah.
60s.
Yeah, the late
60s,
60s, early 70s.
60s, yeah, okay. So now, 30, 40 years on, it seems as if rather than purely striving for constant innovation, like you were saying, right now, it's not a stagnant period with consoles, but a stable period where new games are being filtered into these really pleasing consoles that everyone sort of like enjoys and agrees on. There's a sense of gamers responding to the history of video games in some degree. Is that part of does that inform this turn towards retro gaming at all? Do you think gamers do like the sense that there's a tradition of development that they can look back and see from console to console, from era of Mario to Mario, from the old video game arcade Mario, whether it's just like two guys jumping around and all the way up to like these immersive 3D worlds?
I can't speak for other gamers, but I know I love it. Just because, especially when games are kind of like aware of, for these franchises that have been around forever,
Yeah.
and they have little small just touches that are callbacks to the 80s and where they came from. And one of the really good fusions, I think, of this kind of retro ideas about game design and the kind of the new school that I've seen recently. I mean, this is from a couple years ago, but like the Super Mario Galaxy games,
Okay.
which are in 3D, but they still have a lot of like design decisions like the old like
Yeah.
side scroller NES Mario games. A lot of people I've heard describe like Super Mario Galaxy as, if they were to make a 3D Super Mario Brothers 3, which is interesting to me, and I mean I agree with it. I think it's because those older
Would they actually literally transform the old NES Super
We're gonna
Mario
get
3
remakes.
into 3D?
You're encouraging remakes.
I know, right? Which is I probably shouldn't be doing, but
Well, you're enjoying the remakes, Justin. You sound skeptical of.
No, I think that the nostalgia. I think nostalgia for video games is manifest in the industry in a number of ways. I think that two things have allowed the fans to sort of appreciate a history for video games that they weren't actually aware of. I think that's like virtual consoles where people can download older titles. They've been digitized. That there's no sort of technological limitations. This happens on PCs, the Wii, Xbox, PS, and PS3. I mean, they've all sort of begun to create their own digital archives of their old games
Yeah.
to A, make money on stuff they've already made, and B, continue to remind people that games have had a long tradition and development of ideas about story and narrative and play and the role of the player aren't new. These are discussions that developers have been having for years.
Mm-hmm.
I think contemporary games are even starting to reflect some bits of nostalgia themselves. I'm playing Dishonored right now. It's a first-person shooter, sort of assassin game. It is very much built on a tradition of the old Thief games. It does not feature multiplayer.
Thief games.
So Thief's a franchise where you played a thief, and all you did was
Okay.
steal and murder people.
yeah. I mean that's it. Yeah.
So this game, all you do is steal and murder people. Or not, but I murder people. Full stop. But it's a game that it doesn't have multiplayer, which is a very modern idea about games. So they've sort of ignored that to deliver a solo, singular, immersive experience, that's nostalgia. That's something that people don't typically pay for anymore.
Sure.
They want multiplayer because they feel like it builds the life of the console. And
So nostalgia is partially accepting the limitations of older gaming models
in new forms.
even though you don't have to, right?
Yeah. Or just deciding that you don't need it because we're going to just deliver an experience that doesn't require these modern gimmicks. And Dishonored's a game where you could have multiplayer, but you don't really need it, just like BioShock.
Yeah, and I think that's what I really like about it is it's this it's a new game and it's got great graphics and good story and all this stuff, but yeah, like Justin's saying, it calls back to these games that the Thief series started in like the mid to late 90s and everybody liked it. It was a really great game and people
Yeah.
loved it, so we're like, all right, I like that it calls back to that and it has it innovates in its own way and it's its
Yeah.
own game. But definitely we see these connections. So
It's very innovative, and it's very nostalgic, and it's between those two where we're starting to see developers make great decision about what games can be. And I don't know their design choices. They won't. I don't have a copy of their design document, which I would love to be able to get that document, even though there's like corporate litigation or whatever. But I mean, it's a game that does all of the things that make a great game. I mean, it delivers a story, delivers amazing art, delivers a world, delivers the characters, delivers choices. Players can just end the game in the ways that they choose. There are a myriad of inputs and outputs. Those are the things that make this generation of games great. But not a lot of games are doing that for players in a way in which that Dishonored is doing, but still playing within a tradition of the Thief franchise.
Yeah, and I think, what I'm really trying to say, I'm not calling for remakes because that would probably be horrible.
Sure.
But yeah, like what Justin's talking about is these, games that are in this tradition of, and we can clearly see that they're in the tradition, but they innovate in their own ways. But also, when you mention nostalgia, it made me think about, it's like a weird thing I'm thinking about recently and see going on is, when we talk about nostalgia, oftentimes it's, reminiscing or like pining for a past that didn't really exist.
Or regressive in some way.
Yeah, regressive. Something that didn't really exist. And like I was born in 1985, so that was the year that the Nintendo, like the NES, launched.
Yeah.
So obviously I wasn't like I remember Mario when I was a kid, but I wasn't able to like play it like when it came out. It was
next to yours.
Exactly. It was like a few years later when I actually first started playing Nintendo, and these things had been out for a while.
Yeah.
So now, like gamers are, there's a huge range of, ages of gamers, but, it makes me kind of like think about it because, anybody who's like younger than me, and we're making these games that are kind of
didn't exist when they were alive.
Exactly. Like calling back to the 80s. And I'm like, man, like a lot of people, like, how do they like view these things? Because like there's a lot of gamers who didn't know Mario as a side scroller, like there's like Mario 64 came out in 1996, so people who were born when that came out are like 16 now, which is kind of crazy to think about. So they don't even like, they never even experienced like Mario as like, the little blocky polygon guy.
Yeah.
Like all they know of that is like, if they downloaded on the virtual console or somebody had like, an NES or something and they played that, which is totally bizarre and weird to me.
So this is maybe asking you to speculate, but what are younger gamers then getting out of these older forms? Like if they do go back and play Super Mario Brothers, the 8-bit version that came out a good 10 to 15 years before they were born, or do younger gamers not do that? Is that something that older gamers who remember those times and are feeling nostalgic for their youth tend to do?
2 points. My brother is of this 16-year-old generation who has never seen who was never privy to the 2D Mario. He bought all
on a boxy screen as well.
Yeah, seriously. Trust me, plenty of video game memories I have are related to boxy screens. But he has gone back at times and tried to play them, failed miserably, and returned to the 3D world. I have developed a very expensive and problematic habit of wanting to buy up as many Super Nintendo games as I can, because that was the first console for me. I'm a little younger than Brian. My earliest memories of video games are playing the Super Nintendo in my living room in Killeen, Texas, and playing an Atari 2600 in the classroom of my gifted kindergarten class. Those are my earliest memories. I was beating video games before I was reading novels. That's the generation of gamer that I think lives for nostalgia of those classic forms, of those classic texts, and of those classic consoles.
Yeah, which is kind of what I was kind of wondering, and you kind of confirm that, Justin. Like like we kind of see these things going on because we are of that generation, and so it's going to be interesting, in like 5 or 10 years when like the game, like when these people are like game developers, are they going to even be doing these kind of like throwbacks? So they're like, all right, well, this is the game I played when I was young, like Mario 64 or whatever. So I'm going to call back to that.
But I think I think what's going to happen is that the relationships are going to change, and it's going to be one more step removed from, it's not Mario Kart 64. It's Mario Kart to Mario Kart 64 to Double Dash to Mario Kart Wii, and then towards the next Mario Kart, which is there's a genealogy there, but there's a way in which players are less aware of where it started, but there are still threads that you can clearly see falling throughout texts.
Definitely.
Particularly if you're aware of the history, or if you've lived that history.
And the history of video games it's fast becoming a growing critical field in our in the academy. There are more and more books coming out every day, or relative to academic publishing.
Books?
Yeah, books on
What are these things?
Yeah, I know.
Huh?
They're publishing books on video game history, and people are buying and reading them. Foolish. just play the old video games. Don't read about the history
Yeah.
of them.
That's all you need to do. Is,
And the first conference about video games and history is set to go on this summer. I mean, it's quick, and I think it's going to be, especially as archives continue to develop, it's going to be a larger way in which people begin to think about game studies as a real thing. But I don't think it'll be the thing that I do.
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, when archiving video games, I guess that opens up a whole other can of worms because they can be archived digitally, but there's still a material object that is the original form of the game, even though you can totally replicate it otherwise.
Yeah.
So do you have any thoughts on, well, for video game historiographers, should they have a physical archive, or is a physical archive filled with all the games that you can get down at CD Max, all the actual plastic cartridges, or is the digital copy sufficient? When you're seeking this nostalgic experience of gaming, and Justin, you seem to answer this a little bit, do you need that actual physical material form of the video game? Is it, the square controller from the NES, or can you have an updated controller but still playing the game and manipulating the figures with newer devices?
I think I'm squarely in the minority here. Correct me if I'm wrong, Justin, but I think the way it's going is kind of the digital, where we're going to have emulators. I don't necessarily like that. I'm definitely a proponent of we need to have these, physical systems. We need to. It doesn't really seem that hard, if we just took an NES and, put it in some sort of protective casing or something like that, and we could do the same thing with the games. But apparently it's just easier.
They're artifacts.
Yeah, and I think you lose something if you don't play it on, if you're just using it on a keyboard, you're not, there's, tons of keys on a keyboard, obviously.
Right.
When you have that little NES controller in your hand, there's the A and the B, select start, and then the D-pad, and that's it. And I think we kind of lose something without that experience of, all right, here's how, these things were originally played. And that's it's not even the way they were meant to play. It's the only way they could have been played.
Right.
So in my mind, you lose something, but unless some archive is actually going to do that, I haven't heard of any that are actually doing that.
That's an interesting point, I think, that you make, that there's a specificity to the tactile experience of each particular console. So different time periods,
Yeah.
you have different blisters on your hands.
Exactly.
I would say that there's a distinct disadvantage to playing Pac-Man on the Atari
Yes.
versus on the PlayStation. However, I think the materiality is going to be preserved because we have a lot of really great archives being developed. I mean, the largest in the country is at the University of Arizona. UT Austin is trying to grow one themselves. I mean, and then there's one at Michigan and Minnesota, and there's a smaller one at Madison, kind of. Loosely, maybe. I would say it's not really an archive. They might disagree with me on that point. They would. I mean, it's more like a library.
No.
But people are and scholars are definitely trying to preserve the materiality of the old system, and I think that we're going to get to the point where we have people making old consoles again, just for fun.
I mean, they kind of do that, and there's
I've seen a few, like a Nintendo toaster or something.
Yeah.
I've seen.
and there's a small community of people who I've seen a guy who just makes consoles that play. It's he does all kinds of things. It's a portable thing that plays NES and Sega Genesis and all these games, and he does all kinds of crazy things. But there are actually, I think the patents are up, or some sort of copyright on these old systems has expired. So there's these small companies or whatever who make game systems, and they sell them. You can't get them at big retailers, but you can get them at some game chains and things that they do play NES, Super NES, Sega Genesis, Sega Master System, and they have different little places where you can insert the cartridges and things like that. But I mean, that's kind of away from what we're talking about, but I just thought I'd throw that in there.
That's the really fancy fetishist.
Exactly.
Who has those items. No, that's interesting. So we're pretty close to being out of time. Any other thoughts here on video games and gaming nostalgia? Again, the branding or marketing, archiving. I think it's interesting that sort of the legends that circulate about certain games, the myths about certain games, particularly ones that are notoriously terrible. Some companies just
Daikatana.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Daikatana.
Yeah.
You want to talk about Daikatana quickly?
Daikatana.
Oh yeah, it was like advertised as to be like the greatest game of all time.
Yeah, it was, and it was like a totally inflated
Yeah.
marketing campaign. And
Yep.
what is his name, John Romero or whatever?
I think he was involved.
He
yeah.
was like
Yeah.
the developer, the director of it, and like the
unplayable.
Yeah, the marketing campaign was like, John Romero wants you to kick his butt. We can't
Yeah.
swear
Sure.
on the air here, but and it was it was really kind of this kind of thing where his ego is kind of out of control. Like, I'm gonna make the greatest game ever, and yeah, it was terrible.
Unplayable. it was the ET of that console generation.
Yeah, you mentioned Spielberg earlier, and I had to go to ET.
Yeah, it was the ET of that console generation. I think it was
For
like,
those of you who don't know, ET for Atari
Yeah.
Yes.
was so notoriously bad and
it
unsellable
It
that
almost killed video. It pretty much killed the video game industry until Nintendo came and saved it.
Yeah.
and it killed Atari essentially. They had
There are
like,
dumpsters
dump-
full of this game somewhere.
not just dumpsters, but a landfill.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
That's
yes,
the myth.
landfill.
Like
That's
in the
yes.
desert somewhere in Nevada, and I don't know.
There are just a
there's a
plenty.
landfill of ET
yeah.
Yeah.
cartridges that they had to just destroy, or not destroy, but bury.
Hopefully,
yeah,
there's another landfill filled with Daikatana CDs.
Right on top of those ETs.
Yeah.
it's likely. Yeah, that's interesting that we have the physical waste of failed games.
Yeah. And I mean,
It's already an industry that leaves behind a lot of relics.
yeah.
Although I guess we're getting increasingly digitized, perhaps. But
Cloud
Has a-
gaming.
Has a footprint.
Yes, it definitely has a very large footprint. I guess if we talk about the eco aspects of video games, hopefully they can come up with some better way of recycling old consoles and things.
Yeah.
I can only imagine the waste of different instrument peripherals from Rock Band and Guitar Hero that
Countless.
are
yeah,
going to be around for the next million years or whatever.
yeah, floating around flea markets
Yes.
for the next several decades. Yeah. Well, maybe on that ominous note, we should bring our conversation to a close. So yeah, Brian, Justin, thank you once again for sharing your expertise on video games and tolerating my obliviousness to so many of these issues.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate your loose use of the term expertise.
Yes, I also appreciate that you consider me an expert and me and Justin, I think, whatever, it feels good. So,
Yeah. I'll take it.
Yeah, well, it's been real pleasure talking about this stuff. So hopefully we can come back to this topic again and explore some other areas about video games and gaming culture that we have not yet broached. So that said, we have another 1, maybe 2 episodes before the holidays that the pictures get smaller. So we'll be back next week. Hope to, not see you then, but hope you listen to us then. Have a good night.